two separate minds cannot dwell peacefully in the same brain. So, in the case of Theodore, 5 was a desperate strain on his personal willpower. As each day passed by him, Theodore felt as if he were becoming less and less, whilst his other selves became more and more. Call it whatever you will, a lost cause, schizophrenia, or even simple madness. But do not blame Theodore. He didn't understand until it was all over for him, and his time was nearly at the end of its expiry date. Theodore's friends were never with him from the beginning. One thing that is little known of Theodore is that he had seen more tragedy, pain, and death than anyone else in the world while he was alive. As people suffered around him, so did he suffer, piece by piece. As his friends left him, so too did his soul leave him, as he drowned in solitude and isolation. As his family died before him, so too did his sanity die inside, little by little. By the time Theodore was almost finished off, he was only a fragment of himself, a distant memory. Theodore left us as only a shadow of his former self, swirling around in the deepest, darkest recesses of his mind, masked by the storm of emotion thundering above a sea of distant memory. Theodore was a whisper among an orchestra. He still remained there, but he may as well have been nothing. Theodore's first detachment occurred at age 7. His parents, Carla and Brock, died in a plane crash just off the coast of the Isle of Wight during a return trip to Heathrow Airport. Like any child who loses their parents, an entire catalog of thoughts and emotions overthrew Theodore like an angry hurricane. He had no idea what to do. For the first time, but certainly not the last, he was somewhat untethered. He approached his loss by going into severe depression, but a part of him still wanted to desperately cling on to his almost forgotten happiness. The same happiness his parents wanted to see every time they returned from work. The same happiness he had when they brought him ice cream after school. And the same happiness he gave to everyone else when he hugged them. From this affection he gained the nickname Teddy. Teddy was his happiness. And Teddy looked like any average 7-year-old did. Untidy but fitting chestnut hair with curious and almost enchanted ocean blue eyes, and a few facial freckles here and there surrounding the bridge of his nose and cheeks. He was thin but looked well fed and had an air of innocence about him, especially when he would involuntarily tilt his head from time to time as if he were pondering the existence of everything, or just whatever he happened to be staring at during the time. Time progressed and Theodore coexisted with Teddy rather well, although there were times when their relationship was strained, and they acted like two strangers who had suddenly become roommates. They acknowledged each other's presence, but made no significant effort to even pretend to take interest in the other. Everyone around Teddy and Theodore dismissed them as just being a singular troubled person, especially Theodore's godfather, Damon. Damon was a failed engineer who spent most of his time either drinking special brew or sleeping in front of a muted telly. Usually the evening news was on and there would be news of a murder or rape or terrorism or crashed economies or some other tragedy that descended to befall itself on one or many. Sometimes Teddy would force Theodore downstairs while Damon was sleeping to watch CBBC, hopefully at 5 o'clock when Rainbow was on. Although the most Teddy would usually get from sneaking down at 6:30 when Damon was definitely asleep was the reading of bedtime stories and the goodbye songs being played. The fun of this wouldn't last long enough, since Damon would be awoken by the singing emanating from the TV, and he would process the shoo Teddy and Theodore out of the front room with yelling, spitting, and sometimes even kicking. Theodore hated every moment of it, but Teddy still found some comfort from the short few minutes he would get to spend in front of that TV every night. Years down the line, and Teddy hadn't changed in the slightest, but Theodore was slowly becoming more and more out of reach. Their relationship was more strained than usual, as Theodore would become more and more angry at Teddy for being so childish. And eventually, at age 13, he was snapped once again. The day of his break was so memorable, you can almost hear the nauseating crunch, as if his mentality and personality were bones breaking in half. At lunchtime, in front of the whole school, Adam was able to fight one of Theodore's biggest battles for him. Adam grabbed the school bully, Derek, by the neck and shoved 5 inches worth of small Lego bricks straight up his left nostril. Theodore was saddened and ashamed as he was expelled by the headmaster himself, but Adam simply cackled with pride and dusted off his hands in such a manner that he appeared to have made a great accomplishment in his vile and cruel conduct. Derek left the school in an ambulance, his mother wailing above him, with tears going down his face and his clothes and lower face covered in his own sordid combination of blood and snot. Adam was a fair few inches taller than Teddy and more adolescent looking. His hair was a murky brown and unkempt, not in the untidy way that seems to look neat on certain people, but in a way that would be regarded as either a criminal or homeless. His eyes were a brooding and apathetic blue that seemed to drain a room of all color in order to fulfill his need for it. Very few freckles could be identified beyond paled and livid skin. Adam was thin and reedy, with the shadow of puberty hanging over him. Theodore couldn't tell why he felt this way, but every encounter he had with Adam would always spread an angry atmosphere around them both. Life had become more of a trial with Adam around. As each day passed, Theodore kept feeling less and less himself. It didn't help that Damon would still constantly berate Theodore now that Adam was around to further torment him and force him into a reclusive corner. Teddy was the only person Theodore felt he could confide in, but even Teddy was almost as distant as Theodore these days. Adam would occasionally bully Theodore, but more than anything, Adam loved to psychologically torture Teddy. Adam took on gratuitous amounts of pride and pleasure in restricting Teddy's daily 10-minute entertainment by waking up Damon on purpose and causing Damon to kick off again at Teddy and Theodore. Sometimes, as an even more cruel measure, he would wait a few minutes until Teddy was fully absorbed in his TV shows, until he woke Damon up. However, this did not mean that Adam was safe from Damon's bullying. He was anything but safe. At times, it would be a contest between Teddy and Damon over who Adam despised more. Adam would still subtly bully Damon back with some of his creative jabs, which not only pleased Teddy and Theodore, but also entertained Adam greatly. These childish wheezes were usually small and petty, but very far from harmless, sometimes causing a great deal of injury to Damon. Sometimes Adam would like to place small, almost imperceptible nails into Damon's favorite armchair, and as he would go to sit down, he would jump up like a jackrabbit out of the chair, screeching like an eagle on the hunt. These mischievous deeds would only serve to land Theodore in deeper trouble, making him entirely more depressed, and Teddy could only cry as the sting of pain to his heart ensued from seeing Theodore so miserable. Adam simply folded his arms and smirked with pride and glory. A few more years passed, and Theodore had somehow remained sewn together. On Theodore's first day of his final year in high school, he was in no better state than he was at the beginning of his first year when Adam arrived. 16 years old, and Theodore was barely aware of everything around him, which didn't help with his exams coming up. He was constantly getting into trouble with Adam, extending his devilish jokes towards anyone in the school who happened to be near at the time. Adam's entertainment always left Theodore isolated from everyone, either through his own volition or through a detention from a teacher. Teddy, as always, would just sit and watch, powerless to act for Theodore or against Adam. There was one last obstacle that life sent toward Theodore that not even Adam was prepared for. That particular roadblock was women. Theodore never had a single clue on how to approach girls, let alone interact with them, and Teddy wasn't much of a help since his idea of serenading was going out for ice cream and then going home to watch Come Outside. Then again, in this modern day, food and TV can be enough for most women. Adam was also just as clueless. His brilliant approach was to pour a bucket of water over the heads and try to pass it off as a bad joke. Everyone loves a joker, but that was a bit over the top. Regardless, it was quite clear that Theodore needed help with this particular obstacle, and who better to help him? Now, Sam had the appearance of a young Ewan McGregor, and slightly darker brown hair and less of a squared jaw, although Sam still could have easily passed for a Jedi. Every move that Sam made had a certain flourish about it, and there was nobody in the entire school with more elegance or style and grace as Sam. It came as no surprise to anyone that he was rather popular among the girls, whether they were in his year, the year below, or even in college years. However, there was a divided opinion on Sam. Teddy was inspired by Sam and worshipped him as much as he idolized Zippy. Theodore was mildly impressed with Sam and found his confidence to be an admirable, if slightly narcissistic, trait to possess. Adam obviously scorned Sam. He felt searing anger towards him, but still couldn't help feeling slightly entertained by Sam's swagger and natural bravado. Eventually, through a lot of flirting, asking with flowers, chocolates, and all other assortments of gifts, Sam was in a happy relationship with Lindsay. Lindsay was a short girl with long brown hair and curious green eyes. Staring long enough would feel like gazing across the long green field on a bright sunny summer morning. She was as beautiful as sunset over the ocean, and Sam could not bear to tear his eyes away from her face for more than a few seconds. Then again, neither could Theodore. Theodore wanted to be with Lindsay as well, and became riddled with jealousy after she took more interest in Sam. Any admiration Theodore previously had for Sam was now torn away and replaced with resentment, hatred, and jealousy, which only pressed Adam to have much more reason to direct his anger at Sam. A few weeks before Christmas, and a couple of months into Sam's relationship, Adam decided to execute his worst prank ever. He had set up a spring next to Lindsay's bed, which set off a rope to drag her up and dangle her by the legs. After a few minutes, he would come running in dressed as Sam and throw honey over her, slap her with a feather pillow, and yell, "Chickens can fly." His plan was flawless and simply hilarious. In the morning, Lindsay got up and sprung the trap just as planned. But the part which didn't go to plan was Lindsay's slender figure. The rope slipped up her feet, well past her ankles, and swung up to her neck. For a few minutes she dangled in the air, gasping for as much breath as she could steal until she couldn't reach any more. The struggling and twitching soon died out, as did she. Adam came into the room, armed with the honey and pillow, and stopped dead. Lindsay's corpse swung before him in midair. Everyone became drastically different after that. Adam became much more quiet, but if he was ever approached by anyone, His usual childish anger seemed to be magnified many times as he lashed out at people, spitting like a snake and snarling like a devil. Teddy seemed to have lost what little color he had left in his cheeks and never went downstairs or even spoke unless Adam became mad at him for being silent. Teddy just responded with hushed cries and whimpers like any 7-year-old would. If Theodore was any more further away, he would have been on Jupiter. Theodore was more of a recluse than he had ever been, and through all the court hearings, the sentencing to juvenile halls, and admittance into the high-security hospital. If Theodore was not in a very dark place before, he was definitely there now. Despite the changes in everyone else, nobody was more torn than Sam. He would have killed Adam on the spot that day if it was possible. Something had snapped inside him the day Lindsay died. He became more and more strange, as if he was slowly transforming into an animal. His hair became mussed and filthy. Black bags grew underneath his eyes, and his pearl-white teeth had become yellowed and rotted. Theodore definitely didn't need any more followers, but out of all the sorrow and fear came a new member of this very dysfunctional family. Eddie was a skeleton-like man with a light stubble on his chin, only 2 years older than Sam. Eddie looked like the most authoritative figure, second only to Theodore. Eddie lacked any kind of confidence and was described by Adam as not even able to lead a used tea bag out of a mug. Eddie took all the abuse given to him as he was a monumental coward. At any sign of discontent, his first instinct was to run away. Now Adam had previously focused his anger on Teddy and Joseph, Joseph being another member of the hospital who spent most of his time talking to an imaginary person he seemed to have invented in his head. Nobody knew why, but Joseph's constant bickering with thin air seemed to infuriate Adam. Since Eddie came along, Adam had focused almost all of his anger on his new victim. It was Adam's new life ambition to both mentally and physically torture his new victim almost every day, and Teddy felt sorry for Eddie, but made no attempts to get in the way of Adam's duties. Theodore and Sam actively ignored Eddie with significant effort and treated him as a needle in a haystack, not worth the time or effort to even think about. Eddie's constant fear was both a burden and a pain for everyone else. He would keep them all awake at night with constant babbling about nightmares he had, and always stop them from eating, fearing it was somehow poisoned or because he thought he could see mold. Eddie's fear, Adam's anger, Teddy's silence, and Sam's insanity was bearing down on Theodore like the shadow of nightfall in the afternoon. He could barely tell his imagination and reality apart. He spent a lot of time being consoled by a worried Teddy whilst he sat in the corner, rocking back and forth with his head in his knees, covered by his arms. Adam was still doing his pranks, but purposely made them dangerous enough to nearly kill some of the other patients. Sam acted very strangely towards some of the female nurses. Sometimes he would follow behind them while they patrolled the halls or left Theodore's room. He also took time to touch their hair, shadow their steps very uncomfortably closely, and even sometimes touch them in inappropriate places. Needless to say, it got him in a lot of trouble. On Theodore's 20th birthday, there was no celebration. Adam berated him with old man jokes. Eddie gave him seminars on being extra cautious, and Teddy gave little effort into wishing a happy birthday. Sam seemed to have a strange surprise in store for Theodore. Sam woke Theodore up at around 11 a.m. and led him down the hallway to a cold storage room and revealed the big birthday surprise. One of the nurses was on the floor in the center of the room, her arms and legs tied together and a gag wrapped around her mouth. She had long brown hair and deep green eyes, just like Lindsay. Theodore was horrified at this sight and felt much worse after seeing Sam's wild, hungry gaze locked on the unconscious nurse. Sam was disheartened after he sensed that Theodore didn't share his enthusiasm, but made it very clear that he wasn't prepared to let a birthday present go wasted. Everybody watched in horror as Sam towered over the nurse and violated her. Even Adam was left sickened as he felt a rising chill sprint up his spine and a sickly churning feeling revolve in his stomach after seeing the carnal and beastly look in Sam's eyes. At 23 years old, Theodore was surrounded by strangers every minute of every day, and yet he never felt more alone. Things had stayed very quiet after what Sam did those 3 years ago. Eddie spent his time quietly chattering to himself and constantly shaking. Teddy would sit on the bed with his knees drawn up to support his chin as he hugged his ruined toy panda, which was missing an arm, an eye, and part of its left ear. Adam wasn't doing any more pranks on anyone and just spent his time shooting mean looks to passers-by and yelling at Eddie. But Sam was the worst. Every day he spent his time pacing back and forth, muttering incoherently with both of his hands down the front of his pants. He was quite clearly obsessed with what he had did. He would sometimes sneak out of the room, most likely to commit another foul deed, but also because, among his rambling, the name Lindsay would be repeated a good 7 or 8 times. Apart from these acts, he spent the rest of his time sitting in the corner of the room and constantly dribbling all over his t-shirt. None of them were in any shape to think straight, let alone get on with any of the daily activities the nurses and staff pushed them to do. The final blow to Theodore's sanity came about when Damon came back into his life. Damon had lost a substantial amount of weight over the years, but his beard was much scruffier, and his curly black hair was more wavy and much messier, as if a used mop had been plastered to his head. Damon took a seat opposite Theodore as he sat on his bed, facing the floor. Adam eyed Damon intently as the resentment he used to hold for Damon rushed back to him like a long-lost pet. Sam took no notice of Damon and continued quietly drooling while staring at the floor. Teddy remembered all too well how much Damon scared him. And Eddie, due to never meeting Damon, immediately assumed he was dangerous based on the reactions from Teddy, Adam, and Theodore. Damon stared at Theodore for a while, unsure how to approach his godson, his best friend's only child. Suddenly, Theodore's empty head rose. His fixed gaze left the floor, and his hollow, colorless eyes were locked on to Damon's. And for a few seconds, they were sat there staring into each other's souls. Theodore was unable to focus on anything, but for a split second, Theodore's brain was able to process the years of anger and rage that had brewed in Damon, accompanied by a new undertone of fear and slight worry. Not for Theodore, but for himself. Damon was unable to comprehend what he believed to be seeing inside Theodore. He was initially expecting to look into Theodore's eyes and to see a little boy full of sadness, regret, and perhaps even anger. A tormented child with nothing left to hold on to. Instead, he saw what he believed to be an empty shell, a desolate vessel with no living soul to find within. To him, there was absolutely no sign of the boy he used to know. To him, Theodore was gone. So, who was he staring at? As if by magic, Damon felt the sudden rage inside him explode like a restless, vengeful supervolcano. He grabbed Theodore by the shoulders and shook him violently, screaming and swearing into his face. Everyone was aware of the fight that was about to happen. Adam was angrier than ever, but was powerless to do anything. Sam tried grabbing Damon's arms, but his bony hands were no match for Damon's overwhelming anger. Eddie ran into the corner, covering his ears and yelling hysterically. Teddy saw the violence and immediately began to cry. Theodore didn't care. He just sat there with empty eyes going in every direction, flopping in Damon's grip like a fish out of water. After a few minutes of yelling and shaking, Damon took his clenched fist and threw it at Theodore, punching him in the nose. Theodore collapsed, and everybody winced as they all had felt the pain of the punch. Theodore looked at the floor, which had become stained with his own blood. Anger was swelling inside him, and suddenly an unknown force rose up from Theodore's crippled state and swung back at Damon. He was forced backwards, holding his eyes where Marcus had punched him. The scruffy, bearded, untidy Marcus wanted Damon's blood all over the walls of Theodore's room, and his head mounted on the bedpost. Marcus advanced towards Damon, grabbed his head, and threw it against the mirror above the sink. Holding his torn face, Damon pleaded with Marcus for his life, but to no avail. This monster didn't feel remorse or regret. He didn't just want pain. He wanted agony and death. Marcus threw Damon to the floor and repeatedly kicked him in the face and ribs until finally, after a swift kick to the temple, Damon lay bloody, broken, and most definitely dead on the floor below the sink. Marcus stared at the corpse and got a most wicked idea. This was far worse than anything else anyone had done. Worse than Adam's accidental killing of Lindsay, and far worse than Sam's predatory advances on the nurses. Marcus took a shard of broken glass from the shattered mirror and carefully carved the skin from Damon's face, leaving only a fleshy red head and his other facial features intact. Marcus proudly hung the skin mask on the wall, suspended from a piece of broken glass. Everyone was in awe at this murder, even Sam. Marcus was not finished, though. He wanted more. The next few days he spent killing both patients and the staff at the hospital, starting with the most vulnerable patients and working his way up the staff. After a week, Theodore's room was lined with face masks. It was like a bloody, grotesque masquerade dressing room. Marcus knew he couldn't collect any of his counterparts' faces, not even Theodore, which he craved more than anything. He always thought Theodore was pathetic. By the time Marcus had finished at the hospital, Theodore was dead weight. He was so silent that it took significant effort and great pain for him to open his mouth. He barely ate and rarely slept, and eventually looked like a skeleton, but his body refused to die. Teddy, age 7, was a small and frail child who never spoke and always cried. Adam, age 12, was a kid bully who had an excuse to get angry at anything except Marcus. Sam, age 16, was a severely disturbed teenager who took full advantage of the female bodies Marcus left behind. Eddie, aged 18, never smiled. Paranoia surrounded his thoughts every day, and he even suffered terrifying hallucinations that only amplified his fear. And Marcus, aged 23, was a murderous, vengeful monster. He happily killed anyone without a second thought. If anything, he thoroughly enjoyed killing and enjoyed skinning the victims' faces even more. And finally, there was Theodore, aged 27. Theodore was an empty, soulless skin sack. Accommodating 5 other people, he had no room left for himself. Theodore was, or may as well have been, nothing. Nobody really knows where Marcus, the collector, is now after the hospital was burned down and all possible evidence of murder was never discovered. Police assume that everybody died in the fire and nobody escaped, so faceless corpses were unnoticeable, and the possibility of murder was hidden by charred remains. To the present day, there have been various killings and skinnings around the UK, and indeed the world, but Marcus had been since sent to Strange Ways Prison to serve a full life sentence. Nobody has figured out how people are still turning up with their faces peeled off, but everyone does know for a fact that the collector still updates his face collection, and probably won't ever stop.